Welcome everyone. Let's get started. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be. I saw Catherine is coming in, I think from Australia, right? So it's morning for her. So morning breakfast music instead of happy hour. But yes, welcome to Conversational Collective. This is an open, inclusive meetup dedicated to exploring, learning, and creating conversational technology. I'm your host, Meredith Schultz, and very glad you've decided to join us today. We have a fireside chat today on scaling your conversational AI team with the talented Greg Bennett, whom I'll introduce in just a moment. But before we get started, I have a few housekeeping things to cover. First off, a big thank you to all of the Convo Collective organizers. This meetup is a labor of love, completely volunteer-based. So the people on this screen deserve a big shout out. Bhishma, Olivera, Matt, Lauren, Megan, Sarah, Efioma, Hannafur, Brittany, thank you so much for putting this on each month. And thanks to our sponsor, Voxable. If you're not familiar, Voxable is a conversation design platform that helps teams design, test, and refine their conversation designs. And we've got the website right there if you're interested in trying out for free. And if you or your company might be interested in becoming a sponsor, please do reach out on Twitter DM at Convo Collective. There is our handle if you're interested in becoming a sponsor. And definitely, if this is your first time joining us, welcome to the Convo Collective community. If you're not a member yet, please make sure you sign up to officially join. At this link below. We'll also post this in the chat, so don't worry about jotting it down quickly. It will come for you later. And when you sign up on our community forum, you'll get access to our Slack and LinkedIn groups. Super helpful if you are looking for a new job in the space, hiring, or just want other team members, want to learn what other team members are learning about in conversational AI. So great community to join and be a part of. And filling out the community form will automatically give you access to the Convo Collective newsletter, where you'll get non-spammy emails reminding you about our events every month. And we also include some links to other trending resources and news that we hand curate on the organizer team side. So definitely sign up if you haven't, and you can follow us on Eventbrite, where we post all of these events as well. Okay, so almost done with all the shameless plugging. So if you haven't already, please introduce yourself in the chat. And during this entire event, you'll be on mute while Greg and I have our informal fireside chat. So just keeping everyone on mute after some fun times last year with Zoom bombing. So please do type your questions out. We will get to them as we can. And make sure it's sending to everyone and not one person. Easy to do that in Zoom. Okay, so this is our agenda today. We do have some really interesting pre-selected questions and topics from those of you who left them during registration. So we'll be getting to those too, and I'm sure the hour will fly by here with Greg. So now let me stop sharing for a minute, and Matt, you can spotlight us. Wait, hold on one second. Every time we do this transition, I always have to move everything around. Okay, so yeah, I thought before we kick things off and I start asking questions to Greg, I figured I should just introduce myself. So let me take off my moderator hat for a minute and give you a little background about me. I have been in the conversational AI bots messaging space for about 5 years now. In earlier days, I worked as a consultant for some AI startups and conversational products, originally focusing on B2B enterprise workplace use case, so a little bit different than what I do now, which for the last year and a half, I've been lucky to be at LivePerson as a senior conversation design manager, and my teams design and optimize bot experiences across all of our managed services accounts. And we are a global team based in North America, EMEA, APAC regions, and cover several different industries: retail, e-com, travel, telco, banking, And we're using LivePerson's Conversational Cloud to deploy these across several channels at once. So web, SMS, Apple Business Chat, Google, WhatsApp. So definitely would say I'm a kid in a conversational candy store in my role now. And then our team is also working directly with these customers and doing a little bit deeper on top of everything we can do with the LivePerson's platform. So working with their specific APIs, integrations, backend systems. So definitely proud to say that we can accomplish quite a bit. So things like having a bot be able to help you with a refund, change a password, change your flight, offer some kind of personalized promotion. So all kinds of things. So yeah, enough about me. Putting my moderator hat back on here, and we'll take a minute to introduce Greg. So Greg is the director of conversation design at Salesforce and is an esteemed sociolinguist who I've had the pleasure, I would definitely say you're esteemed. I've had the pleasure to hear several talks from, and so thank you, Greg, for sharing and teaching us all as you've had the last few years. Definitely, I've learned from you, and you founded and still lead Salesforce's first dedicated conversation design practice, which is an achievement in and of itself, I'll say, and that's why you are perfect for our discussion today about scaling your AI team. You've ramped up a global team there at Salesforce across a portfolio of products, markets, channels, and have heard you talk about establishing that system persona and style across all those different areas. You're doing the good work in our industry to not only make helpful experiences, but inclusive, which I've heard you speak about as well, so that they feel natural, build user trust, and do all the great things that we're trying to make AI do these days, and get away from the dumb bots, right? So yeah, so Greg, I will kick things off here with my first topic for you. I thought it would be good to do a little bit of a how it started and how it's going take. If we're in a movie here, what's the setup before we get into the cool stuff about scaling Salesforce? How did it start? Because I imagine it didn't start with hey, you're the director and you manage AI across all these products and channels and all these things with all these people. I imagine you had to do some advocating and had to build it up. And I'm especially thinking of, if there's anyone on the listening in right now, or if we're recording this, so listening in the future, the lone conversation designer, right, at a company who is just there and they're on an island and they're like, how am I going to scale this? Or maybe not even a conversation designer. There's someone who was trying to scale out their AI practice. So I'm definitely thinking about them. Curious how that started for you at Salesforce.
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, thank you for your very kind words. I mean, I do not take praise very well. So I love awkward moments. So like, there's this weird like, oh, this is awkward, but I also kind of like it because it's awkward weirdness about it. But yeah, I mean, it did not start out with like, oh, congratulations, you're going to lead this big old team and whatever. I started out as the only conversation designer at Salesforce. And that was definitely kind of like, I had to often kind of keep it out of the forefront of my mind. Otherwise it was way too intimidating to think like, okay, all right, look, there's this whole sort of, suite of products that potentially, like, if we're going to make it conversational, it boils down to me and me alone. So that, I mean, it was definitely one of those moments where I was like, well, the challenge of it is that, okay, yes, the responsibility falls to me. The opportunity with it is that, well, I have actually a really strong perspective on how I think these experiences should be based on the work that I had done. Before I was at Salesforce, I was at Microsoft working on Cortana. Before that, I was in academia as a linguist. And so based on those experiences, I had a very strong perspective on like, well, here's what I've learned through all of that and how we could potentially circumvent some of the pitfalls that others have experienced there. So like, I was just having a discussion about this today with one of my directs, that while it can be lonely being the only conversation designer in a place, there's also something very kind of like liberating in the sense that you have that kind of creative control. And so the kind of thing I thought at the time is, well, like, okay, I'm the only one here who is like a conversational expert in this role. So run with that, like, and that's sort of the way I tell it to other conversation designers who are alone in their role in their companies is, when you're in the room and we're talking about conversational stuff, no one else in the room is going to know more than you do about it. And like, trust your training, trust your instincts, trust what you've learned. And I think the part where I could take solace in it was that in starting out as the only conversation designer for Einstein bots, and at the time, what was our voice product, Einstein Voice, that I could kind of rely on, you're not the only one working on developing this product. You are potentially you're part of UX, or you're part of content experience, or maybe you're part of marketing, maybe you're part of product, maybe you're part of research, but there are all these teams that are coalesced around a particular product, pulling on it in slightly different directions. And as a conversation designer, my hope is to steer it as close in the direction of, what do we as humans expect in terms of conversational behavior? What do we expect in terms of cross-cultural communication? How do users expect to use the product if they speak a dialect of English that is historically underrepresented? All of those things are where I try to push the product. And at the end of the day, even if you may have this sort of tension between, let's say, your engineer or your product manager or what have you, but that's a healthy tension that, from their perspective, they're doing the best thing they know how for the product. And as a conversation designer, being able to kind of guide them toward the user. And so I did that for Einstein Bot Builder for about 2.5 years or so. So from the beginning, before Einstein Bot Builder was even a product, back when we were still trying to figure out, what are we going to call it? Like, what's the name of the product? And what kind of features are we going to prioritize? And I was really excited at the time about being able to advocate for features like our bot response delay. So, I mean, I'm super nerdy about conversation, and it may not seem like a big thing to folks, but I mean, for conversation designers, the pace of the conversation, the pause structure, all of that is very important. And so I had the opportunity to do field work in Manila in chat centers where there's like tons of agents who are working in chat, and was able to measure their pauses in chat to be able to figure out, okay, what is the optimal length that we want to set for the bot builder? And that was able to ship in product, or advocate for how can we set the framework for potentially creating a more robust conversational repair system when we shipped our conversation repair feature. So that was really exciting as an IC. Then shortly after that, Salesforce, and this was so goodness, that was about 2017 through 2018.
When was this? Yeah, so then
yes.
the plot
the plot thickens.
Yeah.
Yes. So then in about 2019, that's when we started working on voice. And everyone was like, oh, wait, we're going to have to like demo this product. What should it say? And they were like, oh, Greg's a linguist. And at the time, I didn't even have the title of conversation designer. My role was in user experience research. And I went in and was like, okay, well, so here's like, show me the SSML, like where is, like, how much control do I have over the pitch? Because I think at the time, because it was new to Salesforce, they were kind of surprised about the degree of specificity and feedback that I had. And I was like, oh no, you opened the can of worms. Like, I want the pitch to go up here and down there. And they were like, oh my God. And I think that was really when it started to kind of show, like, conversation design is a craft in and of itself. And while it shares a lot of things with content experience and user experience, that it is kind of like, when you think of like a mobile UX designer, for example, it's a very distinct pillar of user experience that comes with its own craft. And while, others may not necessarily have to be specialists in conversation design or mobile or accessibility, for example, you have to understand how it fits into the larger experience. And then at that point, that's when you also need to bring in that specialist, that conversation designer. And so at that time, that's when they were like, oh, we should probably have a full-time conversation designer. And I was like, yes, you should, and it should be me. And so that's when I was able to kind of officially make the transition. I discussed it with our chief scientist at the time and our chief design officer in terms of how would we strategize this role. I decided that because, you know, at the time was such a nascent practice at Salesforce, I knew that, you know, brand is very important. And so because conversation design has the word design in it, if I didn't put it in the design org, it would probably confuse people. Like then we would probably spend 10 minutes of like, wait, you're conversation design, but you sit somewhere else. So that's how we ended up, you know, essentially in UX. And then I set it up kind of like as a shared service where once we acquired Slack at the end of 2020, we spent all of last year really ramping up in terms of, okay, now, you know, a great deal of the Salesforce product suite is developing a conversational app. And as of March of last year, you had one conversation designer. I can't design 17 different conversational apps at once. That's
17.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's a lot. And so that was when I was able to secure funding and start hiring more conversation designers. And the way I kind of thought of it was the only way this really scales is if we centralize the practice, because A, it's still so nascent, it's still a little early to kind of federate conversation designers to these more general UX practitioners and managers. So that way I could kind of grow their career as a conversation designer, develop their craft in line with what we in the industry know is necessary of conversation design, and help teach the rest of Salesforce, you know, UX and product and research. This is how conversation design works as a career. And then, so that's when those designers started reporting to me, and then I matrixed them out to specific products. So each designer kind of served as their own sort of lead for a whole product, where centrally we share guidelines, we share templates, libraries, components, patterns, training data, all the kinds of things where I'm like, you should be able to just pull. These are tools and references that you should be able to share, and that way we can drive consistency across the Salesforce platform, but that each of the Salesforce product teams have their own experts sort of embedded in-house to be able to reference and lead and truly go deep on that product area. And so that's where we are today.
That's awesome. Oh, man, that was a good, to use my movie voice, you know, and then Greg became the director. So then it changed. It's like that was the inflection point. Sounds like somewhere around Slack acquisition.
Yes, about March of this time last year is really when the big inflection point, when it was like, okay, now we need to expand this. Got it.
Okay, so it was kind of, so you mentioned aligning and matrixing these designers to different products. Is that sort of how you justified the scale? Is like, because we had so many, so how did that go? Like, what was that? Was that difficult? Was it, how long does it take to do a design?
Yeah, I think, you know, in terms of like each of the designers, what's interesting is like, so Salesforce historically has had 3 major releases a year. And with the acquisition of Slack, that kind of pushed us a little bit more in this like sort of B2C kind of hybrid B2B2C environment, because Slack, for example, right, like Slack releases like sometimes hourly, you know, and so being able to kind of reconcile those 2 release cadences made it kind of interesting in that for each of the designers, what we had done was we set up this framework for, okay, here's how you intake work. You know, are embedded, you as a designer are embedded within a particular or matrix to a product team. Your objective is, and this is what I told all of the designers in the beginning, is right now, because the craft is so new, that it's less actually about the strength of your design craft and more about the strength of your ability to build close relationships with your stakeholders, because they need to be able to see you as a trusted advisor for the conversational experience. And so, you know, I mean, I trust everybody's conversation design craft, and there's so many resources that we have around that can help stabilize the craft side of the practice. But in terms of the relationships, that was the main thing, is develop a very close relationship with the product leader, the engineering leader, the UX leader, et cetera. So that way you are the one at the table who can help drive those decisions when it comes to specifically the conversational piece. of the experience. And then when a need arises, then that's when you intake and prioritize. So how long is this going to take? How much IA work needs to be done? Do we need to collect more intent data? Do we need a specific rev that can help with the copy part of the conversation design, prototyping, all of that? And so depending, because there were a lot of moments where it was like, oh, we need this now. Where because we are a centralized team, it allowed us to kind of say like, all right, so if one person is kind of like, okay, I have a fire to put out, and another person is like, you know what, I have a couple of cycles, we could shift a little bit of resources and pitch in and kind of collectively as a unit rotate against whatever need a particular department needed.
Yeah, I definitely familiar with that myself.
Yeah.
I have a concept on my team of the lead designer and the supporting designer, because it's similar, and we have different accounts, different brands, and you have different products, but kind of the same thing where you have to go deep on that account or product to really to get into the weeds. And I imagine there's different user personas on these different products, right? Just like we have for these different brands. So designer has to be up to speed on all that, just like another designer, a traditional UX designer would. So having that kind of understudy, to use I guess that's more of a theater term than a movie term. Have a similar metaphor going here with the movie. The understudy is the supporting designer, just to help step in, or should someone get sick, or something comes up,
or like take PTO, exactly. I think wellness is a big thing at Salesforce, and certainly like that's a big sort of priority of mine for the team, is to understand like small but mighty, we're especially in those early phases where it's like everybody is kind of trying to get a sense of their new scope, trying to get a handle on that space. And my main objective sort of as a leader in the space was to remind everyone, I'm like, remember, you're not alone. Like, you should not suffer in silence. Like, yes, you're the lead for, the Service Cloud or the Sales Cloud or Marketing Cloud or what have you, but come back to the conversation design team, to our hub, and bring your questions, bring your insecurities. Like, you shouldn't feel like, Salesforce is a complicated product too. Learning the product itself takes time. And so folks, I would encourage them and say like, look, if you have a question about how the product works or something doesn't make sense, like, don't feel like you can't ask that question, because this is the place where you should ask it, and especially if you feel like, you don't want to maybe show your greenness in front of the product team, come ask those of us who have been here and know more about what that looks like. So that way we can provide that kind of support, like you said.
Yeah, designer safe space.
Exactly.
Yeah. I like to say our conversation design channel in Slack is like the coolest channel to.
Oh yeah,
it's fun.
Yes.
So you mentioned a couple different things I wanted to touch on, just in terms of kind of roles in the team, because you mentioned like kind of at the beginning of scoping a project, kind of in these earlier days as you started adding people to the team. You mentioned IA work, prototyping.
Yes.
So do conversation designers, like, do you see that all as part of the conversation design role, or were you kind of sourcing those out to different other roles that had been doing it? And I guess larger question is, the role mix. Are there different types of roles that you should be thinking about as you're scaling your AI practice, outside of just the strict conversation design role? I know everyone is interested in those, in that kind of duties and roles makeup as you start doing.
Yeah, for sure. I think so. My main strategy in the beginning was, I wasn't exactly like awash with resources. So the way I framed it was, each conversation designer does the whole thing. And I framed it as full stack conversation design, where in being able to kind of justify up toward leadership, like, hey, if you want to accomplish this thing, I'm going to need 5 headcount if you don't hire a conversation designer, because I'm going to need someone from data science regarding the data, like whether that's in collecting intent data or being able to do the analytics. I'm going to need someone from engineering to be able to set this up on the platform if we need to, create something from scratch and not use a bot builder. I'm going to need someone from content experience who can do the copy part of the conversation design, a UX designer to do the interaction design, and then a researcher to do the usability testing. Or, you could give me one head count that will get you all of this stuff, a conversation designer who can see the full scope of everything from start to finish, because I find it like it could potentially slow down the process. And that's why I was always very cognizant about, okay, how much scope are you taking on? How high is your workload? Because as a conversation designer on my team, you're looking across the entire perspective. Okay, we need to set up a sense of what is our ontology potentially going to look like regarding intent. So what are we going to do in terms of the information architecture? Okay, now you need to develop some copy to get a user from point A to point B, and then you need a prototype and show it to your stakeholders. So they on the team, I mean, you can ask anyone on my team, I kind of ask for a lot. But I think that's part of how we were able to scale, particularly in the beginning, and being able to sort of leverage that, design safe space as a way to kind of, help each other. And then in addition to that, also hiring in different time zones. That was like my little sort of secret. I'm like, all right, so when we go to sleep, Europe will pick it up in about 4 hours. So hand this over to that person over there. And then when we wake up, we'll have some more progress done. And so it was kind of funny in that, talking with senior leadership, they were like, I don't understand how you were able to get all this stuff done. And I was like, physics. I leveraged the laws of physics to try and figure out how to scale some of that. And also just sort of providing that kind of structure for folks to be able to raise their hand and say, hey, I have too much.
Oh, totally. Yeah. The adding people across the globe totally unlocks a new level of personal life balance for sure. Yes. And also, yeah, to your point, when people can kind of getting the handoffs, this of course is important. That's a big piece of it. But when you get those handoffs coordinated, you can really move faster. Yeah, interesting. So, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and especially with like a shared component system. So, I mean, that was the main thing I was telling folks is I was like, look, this isn't school. Like, do not reinvent the wheel. Copy each other, share your work, because actually that's going to help drive consistency. And so, yes, we need to agree and do a vetting process for each template or each component of a template. But once we agree, you don't have to reinvent that part, it's set. And that we could leverage a lot of what existed with our content experience team in terms of they have, brand and writing style guidelines that we could potentially draw from in terms of setting up the system persona. They have a well-ironed process for reviewing copy and making sure that it's set and ready to go to product. And so I aligned really closely with our partners in that department to say like, hey, so the stuff we're producing technically counts as UI text. Can we add this to your review? And then, so that kind of helped to also smooth that out a little bit as well.
That's awesome. Yeah, that was going to be my question was, okay, let's talk about these process. Like you kind of answered I know we got a lot of questions about process and kind of tools and whatnot. So you mentioned the design system and components. I'd be curious, like, as much as you can share, how you break that down. How do you do, I think the notion of a conversation design system is really interesting. And I think we're going to see more of that, in upcoming presentations, conferences. People are going to start showing what they've been working on the last year or two, right? So how do you do that? Do you treat it like how a traditional design org would create a design system, or is it a little bit different because it's conversational? Like, what is a component? What are things? What's reusable? What tools are you using? If you can share some of that.
Sure. So in terms of and it's interesting because like I know there's a lot of sort of discussion out there about like, is it a library or a system, and kind of what's the difference between the two. And I kind of think about it in terms of like I lean a little bit more towards library because I'm not a design system specialist, so I don't feel like I can really speak to that. But and we do have the Salesforce Lightning design system, and I took a lot of inspiration from that in terms of how we would want to organize it. But I kind of see it as like a cross between like the way the Salesforce Lightning design system is done in terms of, you could have these tokens that are as granular as like a shade of color to something that is a whole like pattern for how you would say surface a set of modals, for example. in the graphical experience. And so in thinking about, and actually, one thing that also really inspired me about this was there's a Amazon Prime TV show called Making the Cut. It is, okay, so for those who haven't seen it, very similar to Project Runway. But I watched season 1, and the one thing that really stood out to me is that like they bring on these design contestants who are designers, not necessarily able to sew. Some of them can sew, some of them can't. And so there was one time where like one of the designers was like, I need to make a pair of pants. Where's the pattern for a pair of pants? And for some reason I was like, yes, so why would you create a pair of pants from scratch every single time? And it had me thinking, I'm like, okay, so for a pair of pants, you need the legs, you need the pockets, you need the waist. Those, like, what would the conversational equivalent of those things be? So maybe our equivalent of like pockets or tokens would be something like discourse markers, where you'd be able to cycle through some of them and pick out, okay, what are the ones that you would want to use when? And then have large enough components that go all the way up to the template level where it's like, you know what? I don't want to customize this. I just want to ship it. And you could, like, you might have to fill in some things, but that all of those things have kind of fit together in that larger whole. So that's how I sort of like worked with the team to conceptualize the granularity of the design system or library. And then similarly, sort of trying to cascade that across products and industries. So this is what we have in terms of our sort of design pattern, generally speaking. But what does it look like for a sales use case? What does it look like for a service use case? What does it look like for an education use case? We worked on a bot for FAFSA. And I was like, oh, this is going to have to sound very different than the way that we talk to salespeople, you know, and that's, I think, what allowed us to kind of flex and rotate quickly in that, okay, you don't have to come up with the IA or the copy from scratch. You leverage an existing pattern and then make it fit what it is that you're trying to do. And then once that's done, we templatize it. So that way, if you had to do another thing, say in the education space, you have something education to go from. And then similarly for our data library, where it's like, okay, we have these intents that are common across Salesforce. You know, we are sourcing language data from various dialects like African American vernacular English, Chicano English, English as a second language, Southern US English. And that way the NLU is a little bit more balanced. So that way, say if you don't know, you're a salesperson who is a Black woman from Mississippi, you don't have to change the way that you type or chat in order to get the bot to respond. And it allows each of the Salesforce product teams to kind of, it lowers the barrier of entry. They don't have to kind of say like, oh, we don't know where we're going to get the data or how we're going to do this, or let alone make it balanced. It's like, oh, we did it for you and it's done. And that's how we kind of set that up.
Yeah, so you're constantly kind of one-upping yourself. You're able to keep, you're growing it over all these different products and able to improve. I love that about different vernaculars and not having to reinvent the wheel. I know that I have a question from Angela Kelly, actually, when she registered that this is very relevant. So we're talking about the design system. How do you maintain that over time? Like that's always the hard part, right? Is we have it, we put it in, we made a thing, and then okay, what about like, oh, we learned something about the last time we used it, or maybe we tried it on another product or account, and oh, we have to kind of flavorize, we have to make these pants, but we got to make it for formal wear instead of realize it was for casual day wear, to use the reference. So how do you do that, and how do you personally, I'm curious how you motivate people to do that, because it's kind of it's an extra piece of work that has to be done. Is that you? Is that other people in your team? Do you have a committee?
So I think the committee is the team, and it's something that actually we're in the process of setting up. So if I think if we think about, at least right now, the way that it exists is we actually just kind of did our first like revamp, if you will, of the design library. So at one point it existed in a certain form, and now we've migrated over to another thing. And in that process, it's like, okay, also let's do the spring cleaning. But then what comes next is, okay, now that we've done this iteration, how are we going to intake, let's say, how are you going to propose a new component if you want to add one? And so what we do have set up to sort of help, I guess, hold space for that is every week I have this thing called a conversation design studio, where everyone in the team has the opportunity to do some sort of like feedback, or if they want to run a workshop, or if they want to, potentially get feedback on their designs or what have you. And that's ideally the cadence that we would move towards is probably about once a quarter, because something that more closely maps to our release cycle at Salesforce. And it's also going to depend because like maybe if we do something for a Slack app as opposed to an Einstein chatbot, they might have slightly different release cadences. So we're still working out the frequency of it, but that the design studio would likely become a place where we say, okay, so everybody submit all your net new components into this document or this spreadsheet or whatever. Let's see it in context of the conversation design and then review, okay, do we want to keep it? Do we want to tweak it? What are additional variations that we might want to have? For every component that we do have in the library, we try to add multiple variations in terms of phrasing in case the design, individual conversation designer wants to go with something slightly different. So that's a little bit of how it is at the moment, but it's still in progress.
Yes, it always is. But I like that idea about the conversation design studio. It's like kind of like a deadline to get those updates in, and a little bit of like office hours ideas there too, which are really helpful. Okay, so I'm gonna move to a different kind of category of topiks. We definitely got a lot of questions about KPIs, metrics. How are you, you're scaling, and now you've got, okay, we gave you a couple more designers, so
yes,
better tell us what we got out of that effort. How are you thinking about success? Specifically, let's see, Jess said, do you have a core strategy and KPIs that the business or the wider like UX CX org works towards? And how did you go about defining that, bubbling that up for stakeholders so they can see ROI?
Yeah. So at Salesforce, we have this tool called a V2 Mom. And it's something that Mark Benioff, the CEO, invented. It stands for Vision, Values, Methods, Obstacles, and Measures. Some folks might see them as similar to OKRs. They're a little bit more, I think, nuanced than that, but that's usually how we track everything. And so at the beginning of the year, all of the leaders across the company develop their V2 Mom and set the priorities for the product, for the business. And then it kind of cascades down from there. And so the way that it worked last year was the measures within the V2 Mom have to be something very specific, like, did you deliver a certain thing by a certain date, or is there a completion rate for this kind of a deliverable that you want to produce? And they roll up to these larger measures or these larger sort of pillars or objectives you want to get to. And so the way that I did it last year had more to do with how are we going to set up this program so that way we at least have the infrastructure needed to be able to run the design process for these Slack apps, and that we measured and tracked it in the V2 Mom. So did we deliver the library? Did we update the guidelines? Did we publish them in this particular place? And being able to track that, say, quarter by quarter. Those are those kinds of team level examples of KPIs, and that those also, like in a weird way, also cascade back upwards, and that some of those measures also ended up on V2 Moms of people who are like much higher, like executives who are higher than me. So that way it shows both at the senior level, like conversation design is something that we prioritize and invest in, but also like this is the progress we're making on it. In terms of this year, the way that I kind of started rethinking it was, okay, so last year was let's get the program off the ground. This year it's about how do we continue to scale it? And exactly the things like you were asking about, how do we review our design system? How do we prune it? How do we, engage with it? And so I would put in specific measures around that, or like folks have asked about tooling. We have historically used Bot Society, and now we have to think about something different, which breaks my heart. I know. And thinking through like, okay, so what is our prototyping strategy for this? And at Salesforce, for example, executives very much like live code prototypes. And so I think the way that I sort of thought about it in terms of like when the announcement happened, everyone, like a bunch of people asked me like, what are you going to do? And I said, well, Salesforce likes live code prototypes, and the designers here have been familiar enough with the Einstein bot builder that they can work in it. I think we have our prototyping tool between Figma to do the information architecture and potentially some draft copy. And I like to leave that to each designer. Like if you want to do it in Figma, or if you want to do it in Google, or you want to do it in Quip or something like that, like have at it. Just make sure that your stakeholders know how to access it. They can leave comments and that there's visibility somewhere, but that ultimately it all ends up in the Einstein bot builder. And if you know how to use the Einstein bot builder, then by building something in there, it's already in live code. So that's kind of the shift that we're starting to make. And which reminds me, I need to update my V2 Mom because I haven't put that in there yet and the KPI around it. Yeah, that's essentially the way that we track it.
Okay, very, very cool. Okay, so in terms of, this is probably more on the like day-to-day or product level. So let's say a designer mocks up something in was Bot Society, maybe now it's going to be or elsewhere. Is it a flow, like kind of one flow or one job to be done, and then it goes live. How do they know how well it did? Like what kind of metrics are you using, kind of more at the conversational efficiency or success level on those specific deployments and releases?
Yes. So that is something that I think we're still continuing to define. One thing that I encourage with, and it also depends on the channel to which we're deploying it, because we have a different level, I think, of insight depending on the channel that it's going to. So for example, going into Slack, we have an idea about, okay, how many users have maybe used this feature today, et cetera. I think, as opposed to say like, Apple Business Chat, for example, we may have a different set of KPI, or rather a different set of data that we can view there. And it also depends on the type of app that we're deploying. So for example, if we're going to deploy a Salesforce Slack app, where it's essentially our users talking to Salesforce, then yes, we'd be able to see some data, some usage data about how they interact with it, because they're our customers. But if we were working with a customer that is a major home improvement retailer, that is something we wouldn't be able to see because that's their data. So within Einstein Bot Builder, there's a whole dashboard around performance metrics, like and you have it for intent and non-intent enabled bots. So for a non-intent enabled bot, for example, you might be able to see like, completion rate, or, dialogues that have been interacted with, time spent within the bot builder or the bot itself, et cetera. With an intent enabled bot, you might be able to see something like, are there any intents that are out of balance? Potentially, is there an intent that needs more data? Are there utterances that are being confused for another intent? And so those are the kinds of things that as conversation designers, we would look at that and say, okay, if we've deployed an Einstein bot that is facing our customers and we have those data coming in, can we triangulate and say, all right, we're noticing some issue with this particular intent, and we're noticing a lot of time spent in this particular part of the flow. Is there a problem? Is there a problem with the intent data? Do we need to add more? Do we need to balance it in a different way? Do we need to source more data? Do we need to change something about the conversational copy? Is there an endless loop that we've created and we somehow missed it? That sort of thing.
Yep, all very familiar with that. I guess I'll add, in addition to some of the metrics you mentioned, we have some other sort of more contact center and other CX metrics like NPS, CSAT, FCR. Did you get here what you wanted to do? Those sort of things, but. Yes. And then of course there's the struggle of, hey, this metric went down, but okay, to make it go up, maybe we're gonna hurt somewhere else. Sometimes it's like this catch-22 situation.
Absolutely. And I think also like just within also like I think like maybe upcoming kinds of metrics that I think folks are looking at. Like I know there's a lot of buzz around sentiment, for example. And sentiment can be quite a complex thing to sort of suss out. Like, for example, like in a customer service situation, being able to understand like, is it that they're, I mean, yes, they're frustrated. Obviously, they didn't have something that went the way they wanted to when they're dialing in, but how do we know that there's a problem with this conversation as opposed to their overall business experience? And that's something where I like to kind of draw from linguistics to inform. So, linguistically speaking, there's no such thing as a bad conversation, but there is a conversation that has a lot of trouble. And that's something where maybe from a business perspective, we don't want that. We want smooth conversations. So can you track the amount of times that a user looped or redid the same dialogue? A repetition is usually an indication in conversation that something the first time didn't get across, and so you have to do it again. We don't want that. Or was there an indication of negation somewhere? If they clicked on no or said the word no, that's something that's worth tracking and triangulate against where they are in the dialogue. Is that an indication that maybe something didn't go the way they wanted it to, or we would want it to go in the conversation? Those are the kinds of things where being able to sort of tease apart, like, what is their overall customer satisfaction and what's their conversational satisfaction? Because those two might be separate.
Totally agree. It's that balance again of like, okay, we can fix, I've totally made the mistakes. Like, you've got to test and learn, and sometimes it's going to fail okay, we saw this very granular sort of, at every turn level that we're trying to fix. And then overall it caused, some larger issue to, laser focused or, tunnel vision. It's easy to do. Then you learn from it, as we all do. Yeah. So let's see. I've got a question from Tony. Tony Ramos, one of our long-term members, I'm sure.
Yes, Tony.
So he asked a little bit kind of similar to what we're talking about right now. So at what stage in this conversational design and development are designers typically working? Are they spending more of their time on like new things, new flows, like new features, so to speak? Or is it more end up like on the optimization side of fixing these things like we're talking about right now? What's that? Is there a balance you strive for to kind of keep things moving forward? Is it dictated more by product team?
So I kind of want to peel that question apart in a few layers. So like the first layer of what is sort of like where do conversation designers sort of spend the most time? I think that's going to depend on like not just the maturity of the product, but also the maturity of the organization. So for example, an organization like Salesforce, which is, it's been around, we just had our 23rd anniversary, and for 23 years, we have been doing relational database product development, which is very different than doing a conversational product development lifecycle. Getting the company to think like, oh, you should loop in your conversation designer earlier in the process to do X, that's an ongoing sort of like change management process, if you will. If there are other organizations that are maybe a little bit more mature in terms of their conversational development, they might know, okay, it's time to bring in the conversation designer here when we're thinking about what is our intent strategy or what is our information architecture. I'd be lying if I said that there weren't instances at Salesforce where the conversation designer kind of gets brought in at the end to like review the copy. And it's like, and so that's, but it's also a matter of like, and that's something I also often remind my team is I'm like, look, like this is a long process. Salesforce, in the history of Salesforce, we exist here, like right at the edge of the newest piece of it. And so, if you've been doing something a certain way for 20 years, you're not going to change that overnight. So I think there's that piece. And then of course, like the maturity of the product. So you might have deployed it, but you don't have enough usage data to really be able to tell. Maybe there's an adoption issue, kind of a thing. And so I think that also is something I see, like even with our customers, sometimes when I consult with them, they might say, oh, hey, so we're seeing this, or we haven't seen this much yet, et cetera. How can we potentially work with that? And that's always an interesting challenge, being able to work when there's, I think, a bit less of the sort of quantitative data you'd want. And then that's when you start to triangulate it against the qualitative data you do have, where, okay, you may not have the usage data, but you can do a usability test. Or you may not have, this particular KPI that's active yet, but you can conduct a survey with your users, for example. So being able to kind of triangulate around a particular data point until you have enough sort of inflowing data from the users to be able to actually crystallize it. Okay, so then getting back to like, what is the optimal flow for a conversation designer when all that stuff is like running, where it's, you have conversation designs and bots and virtual agents that are already deployed, and you have incoming usage data, and you have net new features that you want to deploy. It's kind of like how and this is actually interesting in that, like, when I used to be a user researcher, we had a similar challenge in that you have to be able to do the usability stuff and figure out, okay, how things are, how are things working out on the market? What do you have to potentially change? But you also have to set the vision for the stuff that we haven't built yet, and being able to run those studies at the same time is a challenge. But the way that I see it for conversation designers is I think actually they should be happening concurrently, because it's not like users are going to stop using it in the market and their needs are going to suddenly just go on pause. And it's also not like you can stop innovating as a company, because otherwise Gartner is going to wag your finger at you, And so between the two of them, the way that I like to optimize it for my team is leveraging a lot of unmoderated usability testing. So in the past, we've used tools like UserZoom or usertesting.com to, if we're going to iterate and say tweak a conversation design for something that's out on the market already, and it's a smaller change, you can do that really quickly inside of an unmoderated usability testing tool and get the feedback you need. So that way it's more tightly scoped and it can fly while you're doing your major design work. And that essentially that feedback data will come in while you're, say, creating an IA for a whole new experience.
That's a great tip. You're kind of like keeping the optimization engine running, and while you're coming up with all these new things too, and adding value, making Gartner happy, as you said.
I kind of see my designers as like, they're jugglers, and I keep being like, all right, and another, but also I'm here for you, right. Because I think it's possible to scale at a broad sense, but my main thing is, or my main sort of concern as a design leader is to think through, okay, I think my designers can handle the responsibility, but I also want to make sure that they feel safe enough to have that safety net to be like, okay, I have too much, or I need to be able to take a break, that kind of a thing.
Makes total sense. If the designers are happy, then everyone's happy and everything can scale.
Yes, exactly.
So it's our jobs, like, got to keep everyone supported, but yes, you mentioned full stack conversation design at the beginning. It's like they have to be able to jump in and understand when to get data, how to do all these different studies, and then jump between optimization, understanding the data to be able to figure out how to do the optimization, prototyping, copy, all UX best practices, so many things. I guess in the last couple of minutes we have here, there are people who are curious, who might want to join your team one day.
Okay, I'm flattered. Thank you.
I think someone asked, let's see, I don't know, I can't find it now, but someone was asking you Salesforce hiring conversations designers, and then we definitely got some questions about, hey, what if I'm trying to get into the space? What do I need to learn to be a full stack conversation designer? How can you do that?
Sure. So right this second, I am not hiring, but that kind of thing changes on a dime. So, if you're interested in Salesforce, connect with me on LinkedIn or on Twitter, and because oftentimes I'll tend to ping folks, and I'm always interested in making connections with new folks who want to, say, break into the industry or change roles or potentially come to Salesforce from another organization. I'm always happy to have that kind of career chat. So definitely reach out. In terms of trainings, I would say, so Salesforce has a designer certification that you can take for being a designer for the Salesforce product ecosystem that I think is very helpful for folks, in that, like, it's intended for a more graphical based experience. It includes some conversation design, but it's a really great way for folks to get familiar with Salesforce as a product ecosystem, because that's ostensibly the biggest learning curve when it comes to coming to Salesforce. Is like, it's its own world. And in trying to kind of like lower the ramping up period, that I think would be a really great way to approach that. I know CDI has several different kinds of trainings around the different parts of what I'm calling full stack conversation design at Salesforce that I think are great. If you haven't met Hans, he's wonderful. So you should check that out.
He was on last month on Convo Collective.
Well, yeah, right. Yeah.
There's recordings.
Exactly. And so, yeah, if you didn't dial in for that or missed it, definitely check it out and, you know, follow CDI because they have great materials. And I also recommend Rebecca Evano and Diana Deigel's book, Conversations with Things. It's something you should just have with you. Yeah, exactly.
It's a desktop resource for me. I often consult it. It works in that way. It is amazing. Yeah. I
also recommend like some kind of quick crash course in user research methods, because I think that it's very helpful. Like when if you need to collect intent data, like I'm very much not a fan of like, oh, we're going to just make up intent data and use it to train the thing. No, because then that model will only be able to react to you, not necessarily to a wide, you know, berth of people. And so being able to think through how can you collect data from, you know, human participants without, and acknowledge the bias and potentially how you're asking questions, et cetera, how to, practice an ethical research method. Those things I think are very helpful in being able to do things like usability testing and data collection. So that's also a nice tool to have in your pocket.
That's great. Those are some new tips that I haven't heard before. And yes, hot tip for everyone that's interested in joining Greg's team. Definitely go do the Salesforce design course and, you know, recommend some good ideas. Like everyone always you can always get in and, you know, get attention in the hiring process.
Absolutely.
Come in with some new flows or new concepts. So those are great tips. The hour has flown by.
Yeah.
So I feel like we could talk forever, but well, I think we'll end it here. And Greg, thank you so much for taking the time. This will be recorded on YouTube for others, so I'm sure many others are going to find this useful. I learned a lot today. Full stack conversation designer, that's a term that needs to be a thing if it's not. So I really like that. Key to all of your scaling with your AI practice. So
thanks so much, Merida. Yes. I mean, I really appreciate you having me on here, and hopefully folks got something out of this.
I think so. Yes. All right. Awesome. Well, thanks everyone. Have a good rest of your day and evening, wherever you may be. And we'll see you next month here. Take care.